Welcome to another mixed faith marriage mastermind where we talk about all kinds of things related to navigating a mixed faith marriage. I am Suzette Halterman and I am a non-believing but attending-ish member. I've got 4 kids that are currently navigating their own relationship to the church. Brooke is post-Mormon and her husband and her youngest attends and her other kids are out, if I've got that right. And Chris is active, believing member whose husband and children are all not interested in the church or religion at all. So that's us. And I love to get together and do this. I think I learn a lot, and it's just fun to bring our different perspectives. We are all coaches who work with mixed faith marriages. So we bring our personal and professional insights into these discussions. So today we are speaking about speaking up in your mixed faith marriage. So this can apply to both the believing member and the non-believing member. When you are married, you share a life. And when you share a life, you need to collaborate in order to share your life effectively together. Without this collaboration, one or both partners may end up feeling resentful or unsatisfied in the relationship. And it can create a lot of relationship problems. So when one or both partners aren't speaking up about things such as what's not working for them, what things they'd like to try and do differently, what things are frustrating them, what they would like more of, it can lead to a lot of dissatisfaction and disconnection in the relationship. So speaking up in order to work through things or adjust things is a critical relationship mechanism and one that's often not working in mixed faith marriages. It's often a broken mechanism I have found in mixed faith marriages, and I'd love to hear if you guys agree with that. So we're going to talk about different ways of speaking up, and we're going to share personal experiences throughout. So before we get started at looking at different ways, is there anything you guys want to add as far as introductions or anything to kind of get us going?
Let's jump in. Unless you've got some.
Let's speak up on speaking up.
Yes. All right. Okay. So the first topic is rocking the boat. When I say that, I'm referring to bringing up a hard topic, something that's uncomfortable that might lead to conflict. This often happens when the person who's transitioned their faith is saying like, maybe I don't want to go to church anymore, or I want to try coffee. I want to try alcohol. I don't want to take the kids to church anymore. But it also can be the believing member rocking the boat by saying like, hey, I don't want you to keep sharing these articles with me. I want you to stop. It's not working for me when you speak negatively about my faith. I do want to attend church more. I want to go to the temple with the kids. So it can go both ways. So how can you broach a difficult topic and bring something up to your spouse that feels scary or that you've brought up before, but it hasn't gone well? What are your tips, strategies, and thoughts about rocking the boat? Whoever wants to start.
Chris, why don't you start?
I'm trying to get the Bob Marley song out of my head about not rocking the boat. Or what does he say? Please don't you rock my boat. Do you know the song?
Vaguely.
I'm going to send it to you after. It's a great song. So I think it's important to recognize a little bit about the nervous system. Anytime we have a conversation with someone, our nervous system remembers all the past conversations that we've had, those times where things went well and we felt very safe, like we could open up and share, we could be authentic. And our nervous system remembers the times where it didn't go well, where it felt very unsafe. And so I think it's important when we do have a topic to share to remember that and to validate that experience. If you're nervous about it, remembering that your nervous system has good reason. It remembers those. It doesn't have a time stamp of when if there was an actual threat or a perceived threat. And so your nervous system's going to be like, oh yeah, I remember that one time we were talking about this and he shot it down. So it's important to recognize when we're going into a conversation that our nervous system might be scared, and it probably has a good reason to be. And I like to think of the brain in 2 very simplified parts. That I've got the part of my brain that I think of as like a monkey, and the other part is like a CEO. So my monkey's main job is to keep me alive and to keep me safe. And if it senses any danger or threat, it is going to go into fight or flight or freeze and want to protect me. And it doesn't make great decisions. I don't really show up as my best self when I'm in that stress response. And then I've got my CEO, where my CEO can be compassionate and caring and think and articulate what I want to say. And I want to check in before I go into a boat rocking conversation to see who's in charge. Is it my monkey that's ready to fight and defend, or is it my CEO that's ready to listen and to learn and to share what's going on for me? So I think it's so important that when we go into any sort of conversation, to try to go at it from our CEO that can think and articulate and ask good questions. So I think that's probably my biggest thing, is checking in. If I go into a conversation in what I call monkey mode, where I just want to defend and protect myself, it's not going to go very well. So I like to check in with that. What mode am I in? CEO mode or monkey mode? And I'll tell you, when I'm in CEO mode, I'll be able to express what I want to much better than if I'm in monkey mode.
So important.
It is, yeah. I want to talk about it from a different angle. So as I was thinking about this, because this question's meaty, like there's a lot of ways we can talk it through. So I'm going to come at it in a completely different way. I was thinking about a common situation I see with clients, and I'll give my own personal example in a minute, but a common situation I see with clients is where a spouse is unwilling or hesitant to express concerns, to express their preferences, to have these difficult conversations. Because sometimes there's an environment in the relationship, and I think this is something I've talked about in these calls before, but sometimes there's an environment in the relationship where you're not really allowed to talk about negative things. You're not really allowed to bring up issues that are problematic, because sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. Like, let's not talk about what's gone wrong. Let's not talk about the problems. Let's focus on what's going well. Let's focus on what's right. I don't want to talk about that. And I think that's well-meaning, like in relationships, people wanting to focus on the positive and not focus on the negative. Like, I get that. The principle itself is sound, but sometimes what happens is, because we've been counseled to like avoid contention and we want to focus on the positive, sometimes that doesn't give us the opportunity to really allow all of us to show up at the relationship. And I mean all of us, like our whole self at the relationship. Our whole self is positive and negative. Our whole self is like the upbeat excitement, lovely things going on, and the harder things and the challenges and the struggles we have. And I've seen this where it's really well-meaning, but it also can be like cutting off the right arm in your relationship. If your spouse, and so I want you to think about that, if you do this, or if you're the recipient of this, if you're not allowed to bring up struggles and trials and hardships and difficult conversations, if you will, because they make the other person uncomfortable, because they don't like talking about negative things, because they don't like dwelling on the negative, that can be really, really challenging to have meaningful, constructive conversations, to work through conflict, to work and get to a resolution. So I'll give you an example of how I've seen this in my own experience. This years back when our kids were little, like toddlers, not the best phase for me as a parent. Like, that wasn't my strong suit, dealing with toddlers. So my husband would come home and I'd be like, oh God, such a hard day. Like, this was so challenging. And that's how I would approach it. And I'd get shut down. I'd get like shushed. Like, no, of course you love it. Like, I don't want to hear that. I only want to talk about how wonderful everything is and how wonderful the kids are. And so over time, I would speak less and less and less about my experience and how it was challenging, and because it wasn't received well. And there's one thing about being like complaining, but there's also one thing about like letting the other person share their experience and have it be validated and understood. And so over time, I'd speak less and less and less about it. And there wasn't room for normal struggles, for me to work through my frustrations with my spouse. I had to learn how to navigate that on my own. There wasn't space for it to be shared jointly because he wasn't comfortable holding space for negativity around me as a parent and my struggles with parenting. That's a challenging thing to put in a relationship because now you're not able to do any of the things that Suzette is talking about. Like you're not able to have those conversations. So what I would say here is like, this is one of those things just to create awareness around. Like, do I do that? Why am I doing that? When do I do that? Does my spouse do that? What do I make that mean? You know, how do I respond when that's happening to me? Like, what's like to start get really curious and aware around how that's playing out because sometimes we don't notice. It's just how things play out. And it's just how things, we don't really think of it as a pattern. We don't think of it as a relationship dynamic. We just think, oh yeah, well, I was complaining. So that was my problem. Like I shouldn't have been complaining, shame on me. And I don't, like it took me years to see it as a relationship pattern instead of where I'd be like, oh yeah, he's right. I'm kind of like shame on me for not always being happy. But then at the same time, the irony is that's not a real relationship with real people. And so like the skill here I'm focusing on is, can there be room for real people in this relationship? Can there be tolerance for all of the emotions in this relationship? Because I think that's one of the foundational skills to these difficult conversations. It's one of the foundational skills to speaking up.
I completely agree. And I'll add to that because I think it combines both of what you're both saying. Like if you're, like Chris said, if you're showing up knowing that this is how healthy relationships are, people are allowed to bring them their whole selves, and what's not working, like that is a necessary part, and you're doing it from your CEO and you're willing to bring your whole self. I think there's some, I've learned through my training of working with couples, like there's some actual steps you can do. And the first step is always to voice with conviction what's not working for you. Hey, I really, and you got to do it with conviction. If you're just like, I think I just don't really want to go to church anymore. Oh, you don't like that today? Okay, sorry. Like if you back down, if you don't have conviction, it's going to get steamrolled a lot of times. So you have to have conviction and say, hey, this is really important to me. Can we talk about this week? I really want to sit down and talk about this. I've been thinking about it a lot. It's keeping me up at night. This is really important to me. Are you willing to sit down and have a conversation about this? It matters to me. That is conviction. It's harder to steamroll that, right? So the first step is to speak with conviction. And once may not be enough. If they kind of steamroll that, or it's like not a good time, right? Like sometimes people just aren't in a place to talk about that. Maybe they're not having the best day. You try again. It's not like you say it once and if it doesn't go well, then you stop. Rocking the boat is rocking the boat. It means this is not working for me. Listen to me, but you do it with love. Honey, I love you. Please listen to me. This matters to me. And if that doesn't work, then there is the next step, which is not just saying, but really being congruent with how much you're unhappy. Like if you're not happy with something, don't just be like, hey, I really don't like the way I'm being treated. Now, can I make you some dinner? Right? This is not working for me. And until we can sit down and have a conversation about it, I'm not willing to, there's a lot of things. I'm not willing to have sex because I don't feel like we're a partnership that can talk about things. I feel super closed off to you. So again, this is not manipulation. This is not retaliation. This is congruence. Like this is bothering so much that I'm closing off to you. And this is the natural result of us not talking through this. So you can really amp up your rocking the boat the more congruent you are. That's kind of the next rung of the ladder. If just having conviction and really speaking to its importance doesn't work, then you got to up your congruence and really make it known how important it is to you to talk about this, not just this is important to me. Now, how can I make your life comfortable, right? So those are my thoughts. Now, what if it doesn't go well? In an ideal relationship, you bring something up, hey, this isn't working for me, and your partner is like, oh yeah, let's talk about it. Let me hear more. Let's talk about both of our perspectives. Let's find a middle ground. That's ideal. What if that is not your relationship and it doesn't go well? What do you do? Any thoughts?
This one's trickier. When it doesn't go well, it's similar to what Chris was talking about, is sometimes that we like shut down because our body's like, oh, this is when it doesn't go well, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? We want to escape. I will add this, when it doesn't go well, I think sometimes the first step, I think of it as like a triage or a first aid. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to take care of yourself emotionally, sometimes physically, sometimes mentally. Like, it not going well is like the first initial step is like, do you need to process emotions? Do you need to separate yourself out and take some time for yourself? Do you need to go on a walk, go sit in your car, take a shower, like something like that? I think sometimes what you just said, that was so fascinating to me. This idea of like the congruence, like this isn't working for me. Let me make you dinner and clean your house and take care of your kids. Like that, I think we do so often because we think that's what a nice person does and a good wife or a good husband or a good spouse. And we forget the incongruence of that. And I think it's similar here. When it doesn't go well and we're not feeling good, like taking some time away, taking care of ourselves instead of forcing ourselves into a situation that we're not ready for, capable to handle, or emotionally, have the bandwidth to handle. Like it's the responsible thing to do is to step out and like do that triage with yourself. But if you're anything like me, we jump right in and we want to serve and we want to help and we want to like do all of those things we're supposed to do, but that is incongruent with our emotional needs at that moment.
I agree.
Totally agreed with all that. I think another thing too is, what does it even mean that it didn't go well? Does that mean that we're not on the same page? Does it mean that we have uncomfortable emotions? I think I have clients all the time. They'll come to me and say, Chris, things were going so well, and then this happened. And it's just like, yeah, that's part of a marriage. We're gonna have times where things are going really well, and I'm putting that in quotes, where we're comfortable with each other, and then we have times where things feel off. And I think this idea that, like, what are we making that mean? Why is it a problem that we're not on the same page? And just checking in, what does that even mean? And I do love the idea that boats are meant to be rocked. It's okay to rock the boat, and it's also okay that there's some discomfort, and to, like Brooke was saying, to allow those emotions. But I think this idea that that it's always going to be smooth sailing, I don't know why we believe that. That's that's not what my life looks like. And I think I have a pretty normal life. So I think to check in that, what does that even mean? It's not going well.
I love that. And I'll just add, how often is it that the first time we do something that it works out perfectly, right? If you don't succeed, try again. Like Brooke said, you calm yourself down, give it a few days, and you try again, maybe with a little more conviction. It's gonna take a couple of tries to, especially for your spouse to get it. Like, this is important. Maybe we should talk about it. Maybe I can't just dismiss that. That was my experience. Our teenager was starting to my oldest was really pushing back about church and just wouldn't get ready in the morning. And my husband's approach was, no, we go every Sundays. If that's what we do, kids are expected to go. And my first attempt to bring it up was like, I think we should give the kids a choice. There was no conviction, and it kind of got steamrolled. No, the expectation is they go. But then I tried again, a little more conviction. This really matters to me that we figure this out, because I'm the one dealing with the teenager. You're working half the time. I'm dealing with a teenager when he doesn't go to church. It's making my life hard. This matters a lot to me. I really think we should sit down and decide, is there a cutoff age where kids get to make their own decisions? I would like to make a decision about that this week. So there was conviction, worked out well. We came to a middle ground and decided like when we would let kids make their own decisions about church. And so that's my example. So before we move on, Chris, do you have any examples, or if you want to save it for other ones?
I'll probably save it for, I don't have anything right off the top of my head.
Okay. That's fine. All right. So another way to speak up is to make requests. Relationships need a lot of making requests. Again, we're sharing a life. We can't control our spouse. We can't control another human, but we can definitely put it out there. Say, hey, I would really like for this to happen. So what are your tips, thoughts of making requests, and what happens if your requests aren't honored, or any examples, anything you want to share about making requests?
I want to talk about this because it's piggybacking off of something Chris said a while ago. Chris talked about this idea that we're the general manager. And it's a great idea. Like, we're the general manager. we need to take control. And so in terms of requests, how I like to think about it is that, yeah, we're the general manager, but we can subcontract things out. We don't have to do all of the work ourselves, but we're the one who's ultimately responsible. So how this might look as a request, I like to think of those as like the subcontracts out. So I'm ultimately responsible. I know my needs. I'm taking care of my needs. And sometimes how I take care of my needs is by making requests from others, but I'm the one who's responsible. And so what I like to tell myself about requests is the other person always has the option to say no, just like a subcontractor. Nobody's required to come and, put in the plumbing. Nobody's required. It's always an invitation. It's a request. Get to say yes, they get to say no. And so then that's what I like to do. I like to really ask myself, like, I'm in charge, I'm taking responsibility, but I don't have to do everything myself. So what can I ask from those people around me? So like back to my earlier example, maybe I ask them for some time and space to talk about my negative emotions without judgment, without fear. Maybe I ask them for validation or understanding or support or resources, or for my dreams to be important, or for time alone, like whatever it is that I need. As part of the general contractor role, I need to ask for that. I need to make those requests. They get to say no. They don't have to do it, but like I'm in charge of subcontracting that out and asking for people to help. And what I like to remind myself is like, yeah, they get to say no. They might not have the bandwidth. It might mean they don't have the bandwidth. It might mean they don't care. I don't know. But either way, I get to ask and I get to decide how I want to spin it. If I want that to mean they don't care, if I want that to mean they're too busy. And I think sometimes I want to make this caveat with coaching. I think sometimes with coaching, we always want to spin it in a positive way. Like we always want to spin it in a way where like, oh, well, they're just so busy, which is fine. Totally fine. And I think sometimes that's a very like good thing to do. But I also want to point out that sometimes when you get this information and you make requests and the answer is no, I think sometimes it can be really hard to look at that and like, that's good information. Like, what does that information mean to you? You can spin it any way you want. You're an adult, adults get to spin it. And I always like when I'm working with my clients, I'm like, what do we want to do with this information? You get to decide. I'll coach you in whatever direction you want, but I want you to be in charge of what we do with this information. And that's one thing I like about requests is I like get my needs met, put my subcontracting bids out there, and then I get to decide what the yes and the no mean.
Yeah, love that.
And I think going off of that, I'm glad you shared that example. I had that one. That was one of the things that I was thinking about too, that we don't want to hang our happiness on whether or not that they accept that request.
Yeah.
And they might not like it, but that doesn't mean that, as the general contractor of my needs, it may be that they said no, but I still am going to make sure that I get that need taken care of, either by me doing it or, if it's maybe I want to have a spiritual conversation. I know that my husband doesn't want to do that. So I'm going to find someone else, maybe like my brother or talking to a girlfriend or something, so I can still have that need met. The other thing that I was thinking about is a lot of times we think that we assume that people should just know what we want. And sometimes, I have times where, my husband would say like, okay, well, what do you want for Mother's Day? And I think in the beginning, there were probably times where it was just like, oh, I don't know that I need anything. Everything's fine. Like, don't make a big deal of it. And then those times where that's exactly what happened. And then it was like, are you kidding me? There's like, what's going on? I think we have to be very careful and we have to think about, what do we want? What is important in, whether, and I'm just using the Mother's Day example. Sometimes we need to stop and be like, okay, this is important to me. This is what I need. This is something that I really want. And we don't want to assume that people, and so often it's like, well, they should just know. They should just know that you should do this. Anytime we find ourselves thinking that, it's a good clue that they don't. So we want to, we don't want to assume that people know, and we want to be, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but we want to be explicit. And, like for Mother's Day, these are the things that are important to me. These are the things that I value. So some ideas could be, and like list it out. Here are some options. But I I talk to so many clients and friends that are just like so disappointed by different events. And I think a lot of the times it's because we haven't spoken up and said, no, this is important. Have you seen the Saturday Night Live skit um, around Christmas? And it's like the mom goes and does all the thing, and it's like, and mom got a robe. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen it.
I have all these things to send you. Um, and it's funny, a lot of times we build up a lot of resentment because we don't say what we don't make the request. So it's important to recognize like, okay, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I need, and here are some options of how that could look. And then remember that they still have their free agency to say no thank you, or they get to do with that request what they want. So we don't want to hang our happiness on that.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I'll just add, relate this is something I learned from Terry Real. He's a couples expert, and he talks about how relationships are not safe. Relationships are not safe. They are inherently risky. So you're going to make requests. That's putting yourself out there. That's risking, because that's risking rejection. They might say no. We like to try to be safe, and we want our relationships to be safe and cushy. But I think if you just know relationships are a risky thing, because you're being vulnerable, you have to be vulnerable all the time. You have to put yourself out there. You might have to rock the boat. You have to make a request, and they might say no. And that's a yucky feeling. And the safety comes from yourself, knowing like it's not going to shatter me. Hearing no, like I'm an adult, I have resources. Somebody can tell me no, I can self-soothe through that. I can try again. I can try other ways. It's not the end of me. Like Chris said, I don't need to hang my happiness on that. My happiness is still in me. So just remembering that relationships are not safe. They're risky every day. Every time you make a request, it's a risk. So just be a risk taker. Put it out there. If it doesn't go well, like, oh well, like that's life, right? We learn, we grow, we try new things. It's part of how we develop our sea legs as we're navigating all this. So, okay, another way to speak up in your mixed faith marriage is to set boundaries. Love the topic of boundaries. So, what does it mean to set a boundary? What are some tips for doing this? Do you have any examples of boundaries you've had to set in your mixed faith marriage? Any thoughts on boundaries as a form of speaking up?
You want to go first, Chris? I know you talk about boundaries a lot.
Sure. So I like to think of boundaries as like a bubble around me. Just like I have my home with walls and doors, I can set boundaries for me around myself. And that doesn't mean that people are not going to come knocking on my door. There might be people there's probably going to be people friends and family members that come to my door that I let in and welcome them in. And then there are going to be people that I am not interested in having them in. But I get to choose who comes in. So a boundary is, and so often I'll hear people say, well, they didn't respect my boundary. And I want to point out that my boundaries are my boundaries. It's what I am going to do to keep myself safe emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, sexually, whatever that is. What am I going to do to keep me safe? So I'm not going to, my boundaries are my thing that are important to me. So my job is to reinforce those boundaries. It's not, so, if someone else doesn't keep my boundary, it's not their boundary, it's my boundary. That's where I'm going to step in. And so, for example, the other day, my son and I were having a conversation, and he was kind of mad, and he got upset and started to raise his voice, and I we were sitting in the driveway, and I got out of the car, and I said, I'll talk to you when you're not raising your voice. So one of my boundaries is that I'm not okay with someone yelling at me or getting in my face. So I'm going to remove myself from that. I think the important thing with boundaries, they can totally be out of love. And one of my favorite thoughts with this is I love you and I love me. And so I'm not going to let you yell at me. So I think I like to look at it as this is in my control. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I'll add to that because I think a lot of this is what do we do in a situation when we need to protect ourselves, when we need to put some fences, boundaries up, if you will? And if we expect the other person to make the change, we're giving them the power. If we expect the other person to protect us, that's not taking responsibility for ourselves. If we expect the other person to stop yelling, angry, stop whatever, we are dependent on them for our safety and for our well-being. It's a very disempowering place to be. So I love how Chris is talking about these are about we take ourselves. They're very empowering. They're how we protect our own well-being, our own safety, our emotional bandwidth, our mental bandwidth. I have an example. I have my own example too. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about a conversation I had years ago. So I'm driving, we're probably driving like across the country or something. So it's not like I could just like stop the car. We're like driving on a freeway across the country. My husband was sitting in the passenger seat. My father-in-law was behind us. My father-in-law loves to talk to my husband when they're together. He just does like a constant da 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 da. He loves talking politics. I mean, this was like probably 20, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, forever ago. So it's not even the current political situation at all. A long time ago. Love talking politics. And we're talking immigration. And he's like leaning forward. I cannot escape the conversation. It's like in my space, literally. He's like leaning forward, his head's between the chairs, wanting to talk to my husband about immigration and anecdotes and whatever. And I was not enjoying the conversation at all. Like, what boundaries can I put in place? So I was thinking about it. I didn't want to participate in the conversation. They can have all the conversations they want. Two adults get to do whatever they want. If they want to yell, if they want to curse, if they want to talk politics, if they can do whatever they want. People get to do whatever they want. But what can I do to take care of myself? And I was just thinking, like, what could I have done? Like, thinking back on it now, I could have easily pulled over and been like, hey, you guys finish your conversation. When you're done, I'll get back in. We can drive some more. You know, I could have pulled over at a rest stop and been like, continue your conversation. I'm going to go, you know, walk around the rest stop 3 times. That would be a boundary I could do. I could also do a request. I could say something like, hey, I appreciate that you guys want to have this conversation. Could you have it later? You know, when I don't have to be in this space. Nowadays, I have like these really cool noise canceling headphones. I could have popped those babies on, turned up a podcast. Like, these are all ways I'm taking care of me. Knowing they're 2 adults, they get to do whatever they want. So I could have done a request. I could have pulled the car over and taken a break and let them finish their conversation. I could put in headphones. At the time, I still liked what I did. I did the request. I was like, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you guys wouldn't have this conversation right now, because I didn't feel like I had any option to not participate in the conversation. So that's how I like to think about boundaries, how I take care of me. Because if they would have kept that, I would have gotten a little snippy, annoyed. I probably would have said something that wouldn't have been relationship building, if you will. So those types of boundaries also help preserve a relationship, because they preserve my ability to show up how I want to, and where I'm not now throwing grenades into the relationship because my frustration is building. There's my real life example.
Beautiful. You guys discussed boundaries perfectly. I'll add just a different aspect of boundaries, which is just defining your lines and your limits. And I like the phrase, I'm willing and I'm not willing. I'm willing to let the kids go to young men and young women if they want to. I'm willing to let them participate in church if they want to. I'm not willing to let them sit in on bishop's interviews without me present. Or I'm not willing to pay tithing on my money, but I'm willing to work out some sort of half and half situation. I'm willing to let you pay tithing on yours, but here's my line. Like, I'm not willing to do this. So that's defining where your lines are. And so the other people, again, it's not your responsibility to take care of how they want to react to that. It's just defining. But I would add a caveat. You should have a lot of I am willing to's and not a whole lot of I'm not willing to's. Like, if you have way more lines than you do flexible areas, then maybe listen to our discussion about our episode about flexibility and adaptability, right? We need flexibility and adaptability, but it's also okay to have your hard lines and to define those to others. Let them know where your hard lines are, but also all the areas where you are flexible. Like, here's where I am willing to work with you. Here's what I am willing to do. Here's what I'm not willing to do. So it's my thought on boundaries. Okay. Another way to speak up is to speak up about what matters to you. Can you do that in a mixed faith marriage? A lot of times people feel like because they have different views, they can't ever talk about things that matter. They can't speak up about their values, the things they're mad about, the things they're passionate about. And this is a tricky one. So what are your thoughts about that? How can you speak up about what matters to you in a way that's productive? I like the phrase you use, Brooke, about not throwing grenades in. Like, how can you speak up without throwing grenades into the relationship? Any thoughts?
I do. I like this phrase you brought, like speak up in ways that are productive. I think sometimes we look at that a little narrowly because productive can mean that you don't agree or that, it doesn't have to mean everybody agrees or approves. Successful communication doesn't mean everybody's happy or comfortable. When I talk about grenades, I'm talking about like contempt, criticism, attacking. Like, consider those grenades. But just everybody doesn't have to be comfortable and happy for successful communication or productive communication. So one thing I talk to my clients a lot about is also ask, like, what's the purpose of the conversation? Before you go into a difficult conversation, I think it's so valuable to take a minute and ask yourself, what's the purpose? Is it to ask a question? Is it to get clarity? Is it to share information? Is it to share a feeling? Is it to discuss options, brainstorm ideas? Is it to make a decision? Like, what's the purpose? Because sometimes we get into these heavier conversations without a really clear purpose. And then we don't have any way to whether it was productive or not. And so we just fall back on some of what I think are maybe less helpful definitions of productivity, like, was everybody comfortable? Not always a great definition of productivity in one of these conversations. And so what is your purpose? Is it to make a decision? If you make a decision, you were productive and successful. Is it to share a bit of information? If you do that, you're successful and productive. If it's to keep everybody comfortable and happy, that's a very different kind of conversation, probably not in the realm of what we're talking about on this podcast today.
I think it's also, I love those ideas, Brooke. I think also thinking about, like, when we're driving, sometimes we're backseat drivers. And it's like, why are you going this way? Why didn't you turn left? I always turn left here. And checking in, like, sometimes we're speaking up because we think our way is right and they're wrong. And checking in, do I really need to speak up about this? Or is this, it's possible when we're, with a driving example, we're going to get there either way. So I like to kind of check in, why am I wanting to speak up about this? And I also, so shifting gears a little bit, I love the phrase "for me." For me, this is really important to me. I recognize that maybe this isn't your thing, but for me, this is a big deal. And making that clear that I recognize that this is something important for me. And I think that can be, there's so many different spots we can use that. For me, this is how I feel about this. This is really important to me.
I love all of that. I'll just share an example that I just had like last week of this. So our stake page, somebody had shared this video about like boys singing about how they want girls to be modest. To me, it was like super toxic of modesty and girls being responsible for men's sexuality. It made me furious. And I was frantically cleaning the house. Now, I could have shared with my husband, like, look at this video. Isn't this horrible? And like kind of pushing my perspective on him, like trying to get him to calm me down. But what I did, I just shared what my dilemma was. I just said, I'm frantically cleaning the house because I don't know if I should respond because this person's my friend and I can't decide if it would be appropriate for me to really stand my ground and say that I don't agree with this online or not. So I was sharing my dilemma. I wasn't like, watch this video and getting my husband's feedback. I was like, I'm frustrated. This is why I'm cleaning the house like crazy. Here's my dilemma. I wasn't even asking for his opinion about it. It was like, this is my dilemma to solve. I'm just sharing what's going on with me. And he was like, okay. But it felt satisfying for me because I shared a part of my angst, but it was productive. I wasn't like pushing my perspective on him or needing his agreement. It was like, here's my dilemma. I'm revealing why I'm upset. I totally don't care that you even care about modesty videos. Like, irrelevant. Like, that's, and it was like a 2-minute conversation, but it was like sharing. And then I figured out how to solve my own dilemma and it was fine. So that's just
I also stress clean, by the way, Suzette.
Yes,
me too.
Organize and stress clean. Yes.
All right. So another way to speak up is to be explicit instead of implicit or passive. I see a lot of clients who use very passive communication. I'm trying to think of some examples off the top of my head, but just
Oh,
like dropping
I have
hints.
tons. I have
Yeah, give some
some
examples. Okay.
so many. I'll just jump in because all I did here is I just gathered some examples because this is something I talk about with my clients a ton. And it's something I've personally done a lot because I think, and I'm going to speak just to women for a minute. I think because women, we are socialized to be passive. Like, and that's why we do this. It's not because we're trying to be like weak or dumb or something. We are socialized to be passive. And so we need to be aware of that so that as we start to look at like the impacts of what that has on our relationship, we can decide to be different. But I want to point out that it's hard to be different because sometimes when we start to be more direct and clear, sometimes that's labeled as aggressive or unkind. And I want to just say very clearly, it's not unkind. Being clear and direct is not the same as being unkind. I tell this to clients all the time. I'm like, unkind is when you start a conversation like, I hate you and your socks stink and your cat's ugly. That's unkind. Being clear and direct is not unkind. Kind is clear, is one of my favorite things that I've heard therapists say. But here's my examples. Okay, good. I got these ready. One actually Chris brought up earlier, Mother's Day. Passive is it's not a big deal. It's not that important to me when what you really mean is I'd really like a thoughtful gift. Like I'd really like you to take some thought and to just look at me and like be thoughtful and just add 2 + 2 and figure out a gift. That's clear. I'll give you a whole bunch more. One is like it's so hard getting the kids ready for church, where an active one would be like, can you please help me get the kids ready for church? I was rushed all day and never got a chance to work on my lesson. That's passive. Direct would be, can you take the kids for the next hour so I can prepare my lesson? I'll give you a direct one. It hurts me when I hear people criticize the church, or you could say it another way. It hurts me when I hear people criticize those who leave the church. That's direct. Indirect is like, who made you an expert on this? You know, something a little snarky or a little sarcastic like that. Another one is, here's indirect. Fine, I'll just keep going alone like I always do, versus I don't feel supported. Very different. Like you can kind of feel it. That one is indirect, one is direct. One is clearly asking for what you need or stating how you're feeling. The other one is like, it tends to be just a little bit of a jab, going a little dancing around it and not really being clear as to what you're making a clear request or clearly identifying and sharing your emotion.
Great examples. Yes, I think we all, I know I've been a passive in the past, very passive, hint dropping, alluding to things, right? Yeah.
I think it's important to be very clear about what we need. Sometimes I know like in my marriage, maybe I'm having a hard time and I'm frustrated and maybe my husband will respond with like, well, why don't you do this? Or why, like trying to solve it and recognizing like, okay, what do I want him to do? And then telling him that, you know what, right now, all I really want is a hug. Or right now, I just want you to say that stinks. Or, to figure out, just making it, this is what I want. Or, and I sometimes we don't know what we want, but I think we know like, wait, I don't want you to solve it. I just want you to do this and tell them that. I think that can be so important. And once again, they get to choose if they want to do that or not, but that at least we can tell them this is what I need.
I love that. I think this is an easy place. If you're struggling with speaking up, this is an easy place to start, is noticing where am I being very passive in my communication and dropping hints and things like that. And again, a lot of these strategies of communication we learn from our family of origin, because when we're kids, adults are scary. It is scary to have adults disapprove, reject us, not agree with us. So it is very scary to make a very explicit request or say explicitly what we want, depending how our families handle that. So it's important, like you said earlier, Chris, to get back into your CEO brain, not your monkey brain, your CEO brain that remembers that was when I was a kid. Maybe that's how my family did it. I'm an adult now. I have a lot of resources to deal with rejection or disapproval. So I can explicitly ask what I want and I can deal with the consequences. I'll be okay. This is part of what adults do, is they have to have explicit communication. This is part of healthy relationships. So it's using your CEO brain to talk you through all these things. Adults need to speak actively, proactively, not passively. That builds resentment when it doesn't happen. So those are my thoughts on that. So any kind of concluding thoughts? If you struggle with speaking up in your relationship, any thoughts on how to work on that, or any other concluding thoughts about speaking up in your relationship? Examples, thoughts, whatever you want to share.
Share my concluding thoughts. One is your needs are like 100% reasonable. They're fine. Like, I think a lot of times we really doubt, like, I need too much, I'm too much, I'm asking too much, like it's not fair. Like we tell ourselves things that aren't true. Our needs are 100% reasonable and they're okay. It's okay to have needs. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to express our messiness. It's okay. All of that is totally fine. I think sometimes we don't speak up about it because we don't think it's okay to rock the boat. We don't think it's okay to have negative emotions. We don't think it's okay to ask for things. We take self-sufficiency a little too far sometimes. The other piece I'll just add is, like, a lot of this is learning to tolerate feelings of discomfort and not having everybody comfortable all of the time. I mean, difficult conversations aren't saying the right thing so everybody feels comfortable. That's not having a difficult conversation. Having these types of conversations and learning how to rock the boat and learning to speak up for yourself often means learning how to tolerate your own discomfort and tolerating other people's discomfort, and not making it mean that something's gone wrong, but just making it mean that these are two people experiencing uncomfortable emotions and navigating that and processing that and coming up with strategies and solutions and ways of partnering in the midst of that.
Beautiful. I love all of that. What about you?
I think I know there was a good chunk of my life where I would avoid conflict like the plague. It was just like, nope, not going to go there. I'm not going to share this. It's just like, let's just keep the peace. And I think it's so important to recognize that when we avoid external conflict with another human, we still have internal conflict. So we didn't avoid conflict. It's just internal versus external. And recognizing that and deciding, okay, there is going to be conflict either way. What is going to help us to progress in this relationship? What's going to help us to be able to be more vulnerable and to grow together? So I think it's so important to recognize that there will be conflict either way. And going off of that too, we have this, it's like we want to be peacemakers. We want to, that's something that's important to, and we've been taught that we should be peacemakers. And I also want to point out with that, being a peacemaker also implies that you can feel peace too. And it might be that it's because you have rocked that boat that you deserve to have peace as well.
I love all your thoughts. And my concluding thoughts are, what's the cost of not speaking up in your relationship and in your mixed faith marriage? And one of my mentors would teach us that couples on the brink, this mechanism of bringing things up and having your partner be receptive to it is broken. And I can tell you from my experience, that is true. Not just because he said that, because I've noticed it. Every couple on the brink, this is a broken mechanism. Either the speaking up part is broken, or the receptivity on the other end is broken, and oftentimes both. So it's critical. Like, the couples who don't get this, the resentment builds, the division builds, the passion dies, the intimacy dies, they divorce. This is huge. So I think the cost of not speaking up is huge. This mechanism, if your part is, I don't speak up productively, or I don't speak up and I'm resentful, that is your part to work on. You don't have any control over the receptivity part, but if your partner's not receptive, but the more you speak up, it gives them a chance to work on their receptivity part, and they might need to learn some things. Side note, we do have lots of episodes on that. We have an episode on listening, on flexibility and adaptability, on partnership. Those are all things that might help the person who struggles to be on the receiving end of someone speaking up in their mixed faith marriage. So great thoughts, ladies. Love talking to you as always. Anything else before we go?
I'm good.
I think I had one last little thought. Just this whole, often when we speak up, it feels like there's a problem. It caused a rupture. And relationships have rupture. But the rupture isn't the problem. It's the chance to go in and repair and to learn from each other. So being afraid of conflict and rocking the boat, that we're not looking for perfect, we're looking for growth. And a lot of times that growth comes through repair from a rupture. So all is not lost if you feel like things have ruptured. It's a beautiful opportunity to repair and to move forward.
So true. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Right.